This is from Illuminati, Cabal, Hidden Agenda. The book is found free. Source hypnotherapyhealing.com in this bio. We're up to chapter 7. Where did humans come from? This is expanded knowledge. This is not for sheeple. This is for people who want to raise their frequency. If you want to continue on being part of the system, sheeple, being controlled, move on. Let's get into it. Before we get into the human race, let's start sometime before the human race came into existence. The archangels were going through the process of involution. They were stepping down in planes and taking different forms and to hold lower portions of their energy, or what some like to call their consciousness. There was also seeding of the lower densities with newer and smaller sparks of source, and these portions of consciousness had to work their way up through the densities through the evolution process. Pause there. Earlier we spoke about involution, separation from source to these higher planes of existence, which are just different oscillations of the frequency. We are all part of this, of the whole. Some call it the matrix. It's the whole universe with everything in it, all planes of existence. Let's go back into it. The higher density beings held more knowledge and light, so they were the ones managing and spreading DNA across the cosmos. They were tinkering and learning as they went. After a while, the higher density portions of Source began to group up and form different groups. Some of these were overseeing the seeding of the animals on planets, and others were expanding the galaxy. So there's hierarchy, it's organized, as we can see here. It isn't just a free-for-all, and just because you're in a higher plane of existence doesn't mean that you have all the answers and you can do everything. People have that misconception that, oh, because you're in the fifth, sixth, seventh density, you're the you know everything. No, it isn't like that. We are just observing this physical existence here, but there's others, and then others beyond that, and then others beyond that, and you are existing multidimensionally in all these different densities, which I don't, it's a good word to describe it, but it isn't 100% accurate. We've already gone through that before, but let's continue on. I wanted to paint this picture of different organized higher density groups working together in managing the development of themselves and the galaxy. They also wanted to make sure that their galactic work was not destroyed. On their way down, they noticed that the lower density beings that were sent far from Mother were destroying whatever they came across. Pause there. As we mentioned in the last chapter, we did have a release of energy, of consciousness, sparks of soul, fragmented souls that left Mother because of that feeling. And again, my opinion, I touched on this. I feel that it was done on purpose, designed this way for duality. But some people disagree with me. I don't know for sure. But we are the creators of our own reality. So there's no true or false. So we need to keep that in mind. Nobody's 100% right. Infinite amount of timelines. Any possibility is possible. And in reality has happened. Let's go back into it. I mentioned this earlier in the book, but it applies to the human race starting. Something happened to the Kygar. Pause there. Some people pronounce this Seagar. I pronounce it Kygar. Not sure which is correct. That caused their population to be reduced. From what I understand, a group of higher density beings stopped the Kygar from continuing on this pace of destruction. As we mentioned, pause there, as we mentioned in the last paragraph, these energies individually, they were individual thinking sparks of energy, of consciousness, of soul, whichever title you want to identify these portions of consciousness works. And their goal was to disrupt the universe, disrupt the playground that the higher density beings were creating and going through involution. These regressive dark ones had been expelled or pushed down. They felt this rejection. They continued to go down and then take physical incarnations in physical forms in smaller portions of energy and or consciousness. I hope you're following here. And they were the first to take a physical form, whereas the light ones were still not incarnating in vessels. They were still creating, tinkering, working, creating galaxies, planets, bodies of ocean, animals, bipedal, 5-star type of vessels. And eventually they do take incarnation. They start taking physical form or incarnating and using these vessels for an experience. That's what we're getting into here in chapter 7. The story, back into it. The story is that this group was called the Elohim. There is an ancient text that says that the Anunnaki were the Elohim, but that is not possible because Anunnaki did not exist during this ancient war against the Kaigar. This war happened before the Lyrans existed, and the Anunnaki came to exist after the creation of the Lyran race, so the Anunnaki can't be the Elohim. This was put in the ancient text by loyal followers of Marduk to have humans worship the Anunnaki as their god and creator. This is why reading ancient tablets such as the Sumerian tablets can be confusing. The Draconians and Kaigar had to do everything possible to keep the humans blind to the true history, and this is why there has been so much focus on controlling history and extraterrestrial information. The Elohim did not remove the Kaigar from the equation completely, but they reduced their population drastically. This was done with the hopes that the Kaigar would change their regressive ways, but they did not change. By this time, other intelligent life forms started appearing on planets. Let's pause there. So, we've heard that title before. In these ancient books, and I don't want to mention their names, but a lot of them they dedicate their lives to them, to these ancient texts, but they've been written to control, to manipulate, to twist. They have some sprinkled in truths, but it's convoluted. Now, the regressive ones that took physical form were destroying, conquering physical plane of existence. As we mentioned earlier, 3rd and 4th density. They were low 5th density. They were involved in conquering, they felt they were the first ones in those planes, and it was there for them to conquer, control, and dominate. And now, okay, so let's just finish up this paragraph. The Kaigar, after the confrontation, splintered into. So that's what I wanted to mention. So because they were getting out of control a little bit, they needed to be checked. So they were checked by higher plane of the light beings, and their population was reduced. The Kaigar, the original vessels that they were incarnating in, and they were causing this destruction. So it's mixed information of how exactly their population was reduced, but it was reduced, but in hopes, they weren't completely wiped out, in hopes that they would come around to the light, because everything is to return to source. So the Kaigar, after this confrontation, splintered into different groups and were rulers of the Draconian reptilian race. The Kaigar race is bigger than the Draconian race and is considered to be royalty who rules over the Draconians. The Kaigar had to resort to move to more cunning ways to continue their plan of galaxy domination, because their numbers had dropped and they had to rebuild. The Draconian Empire was forced, and the Draconian Empire was formed, and when confronted with intelligent colonies, they realized that a military attack was not always the best course of action to take over the colony or planet. They started to infiltrate the different planets' societies to influence the people to do what they wanted, and eventually the people would fall under the mind control of the Draconian Empire. This was better because groups of opposing extraterrestrials were being formed to protect themselves and their friends from the Draconian Empire military. But if the Draconians could infiltrate and convince the people to willingly give up their rights and were willing to be controlled when there would not be a military fight, because every being in the universe has the right to have free will. Okay, now back to the humans, and we're going to stop it there. This is very important. We're talking about the beginning of the human race, the light ones taking on these physical vessels for incarnations of these experiences. But obviously we need to speak on the reptilian race that was regressive and still involved in, or not involved, but around. They were here first. That is, everyone from higher planes agree with this, where they're here first. Obviously, there's an infinite amount of timelines where I'm sure out there's a timeline where they return to the light before taking physical vessels. But we're talking about the timelines that match most with the frequency with the current timelines that we're in, that we're experiencing. So I know it's expanded knowledge when we speak on history and speaking of all our truths. But anyway, so I'm going to leave it there, but we can see that the Draconians, they were slowed down, and now we've got light ones taking physical form, incarnating in these bipedal 5-star type of vessels. And we're going to get into the more of these details. But one last point I want to bring out is they spent so many years conquering, and we're going to get into the Orion Wars and the Great War and all of that. But they spent so many years conquering the Draconians. They were conquering everything without much resistance until they were finally confronted to be slowed down. But notice the strategy that they implemented from millions of years ago. They realized that these wars is just a losing battle. If they could somehow figure out a way to have this society of a planet to agree to go along willingly to their agenda, to their plan, because of the law of free will, they would not be dealt with. They would not be slowed down. They would not be stopped, as long as they could convince people by tricking them that the reality of the planet needs to be one that the reptilian race wants. Sounds familiar? How our history has been manipulated, how our medical system has been manipulated, how our educational system has been manipulated. It's interesting when you look and dig into these different facets, and people with firsthand experiences of the truth, how they end up dying or ostracized. It's just a big old mystery how that all seems to happen to prevent the awakening. But we reached a point where the great awakening is upon us. But because it's everything, it's inevitable. So I just want to point that out, that they learned how to get away with implementing their agenda. And that's exactly what we see here now. This is exactly what we're fighting against now. Majority of society is asleep. They don't care. And if you do tell them, They don't want to know. They don't want to be bothered. They want to continue down their path of mental slavery. All right, my star seeds, much love. Let's continue the hard work.